In today's video, we're working with essential stencil transfers, Iron Orchid Design paint inlays, and epoxy resin. I'm Cindy. My husband is Chris. Welcome to CnC DIY Factory. In Project 1, we'll be working with two of our arched frames with kickstand DIY kits. These can be found on our website at www.cncdiyfactory.com. These frames are fully customizable, allowing you to use all of the layers or just the ones you need while saving the rest for another project. I will be using the DIY cottage colors in white linen and a chip brush. I'll be painting the front and back of the backer piece, just the front part of the arched frame, and the front and back of the kickstand pieces. I'm using the heavy dry brush method so that I do not have a full coverage of the paint. I want some of that wood to peek through so that when I come back in with the stain, you'll be able to see the different variations of colors. Once that white linen has completely dried, I'm going to come in with the Minwax Water-based Stain in navy blue. These stains can be found at Lowe's and Menards and tinted at the paint counter. I use a staining sponge that I purchase off of Amazon to apply the stain. This stain dries very quickly, so I work in small sections and use my misting bottle to moisten the stain so I can wipe it back with my shop towel. I love the variegated look of the stain and the DIY cottage colors when this technique is applied. I've applied the navy blue to everything except the front side of that backer board. For the front side of the backer board, I'm using the Minwax Water-based Stain in Legacy Brown. And I'll be working around just the outside edge of that backer board. I want the outside edges to be the darker brown and have it blend towards the center. The center is going to be the light source, so I want that spot to be brighter. You'll see me alternating between the stain and my misting bottle to work that stain towards the center and to keep it darker around the edges. I decided the frame needed a little label, so I'm using the IOD Conservatory labels and the Alumilite fast casting resin. This is a 50-50 mixture of part A and part B. You have about 30 seconds to stir it and another minute or so to pour it, and within 10 minutes you can pop it out of the mold. Please be sure to follow the manufacturer's instructions on proper handling of this chemical. In about 10 minutes, the resin has set and I can pop these out of the mold. I'm going to paint them with the DIY Hey Sailor. I'm using the Essential Stencil Bunny Portraits transfer on both of these frames. Once I have the bunnies lined up exactly where I want it on the backer, in alignment with the front of the frame, I'm going to take a piece of my painter's tape and I'm going to adhere it to the top part of the transfer. I'm going to create a hinge so that I can pull that white backer piece out and smooth down my transfer without shifting my transfer out of place. To apply a transfer, you simply take your transfer tool and rub across the entire surface of your transfer. Once I've gone over the entire transfer once, I'll start in a corner and I'll work my way along the edge and all the way around the transfer image. making sure to get all of the little tiny pieces adhered. To adhere the front of the frame to the backer board, I'm going to use the Titebond Quick and Thick glue. Once I have it glued down and lined up right where I want it, I'm going to clamp it down and let it dry. I'm going to give it about a half an hour. This Titebond works pretty quickly. While I'm waiting for the Titebond to set up, I'm going to take the base plate for the kickstand, and I'm using a CA glue in the thick formula. The backer board has the base plate scored for easy placement. Once both glues have set up, I'm going to seal the kickstand before attaching it to the frame. You can use a brush-on sealer or a spray sealer, but today I'm going to be using the DIY clear wax. It is much easier to seal these kickstands before attaching it to my frame. I'll be using a combination of the Titebond Quick and Thick and the CA glue in the thick formula. I start by attaching the first hinge into the base plate and letting that set up. When using a wax for the sealer, you'll want to apply that after you have glued the pieces together. Otherwise, the wax will keep the glue from setting. For the second hinge, I'm applying the wax to the inside portion of the hinge only. Then I flip it over and add the CA glue to the outside edge of that hinge. Then I'll take the kickstand and insert it into that hinge, making sure the glue is towards the outside. Once the kickstand has been adhered to the back plate, I will finish clearing the entire piece with the DIY clear wax. And here are our finished bunny portraits. I would love to hear what you think of these bunny portraits. Please leave me a comment below. For project 2, we're going to take 2 scrap pieces of wood. We're going to start by painting both pieces of wood with DIY crinoline. After both of the blocks of wood have been painted with crinoline, we're going to use the IOD Paint Inlay from the 2025 spring release called Spring Melody. I'll start by cutting out 2 of the images that fit on our blocks of wood. Paint inlays have a grid side on one side of the paper and the paint on the other side. I am laying the paint inlay with the grid side down and the paint side up. I'm then going to mist the paint side to activate the paint on the paint inlay. A paint inlay needs to be laid into something wet in order for the paint to transfer. I am applying a second coat of the crinoline and making sure that it is wet with my mister, and then I will apply the paint side down into that wet paint. Once I have the paint inlay laid into the wet paint, I'll take a damp towel or a baby wipe and I will apply pressure and smooth it down into that wet paint. And then I'll take my mister and once again spritz it with some water to make sure that the paint is activated. And I'll repeat this for the second block. Once both paint inlays are completely dry, and you'll be able to tell because you can no longer see through the paper, it'll be opaque, you spritz it with your mister, dab it down with your towel, make sure it's nice and wet, wait about 30 seconds, and then you can peel the transfer away. Be sure to keep those inlays, lay them paint side up to dry because you can use them up to 3 or 4 more times. Sometimes when applying a paint inlay, you get these lines around the edges. They're called panty lines. And you can take a damp cloth or a baby wipe and just gently smooth out those wrinkles and blend it in. A paint inlay must be sealed, and you can use a spray sealer, you can use wax, or you can brush on a top coat. To seal these paint inlays, I'll be using the Wise Owl varnish in matte finish. The paint inlays are easily activated, so you have to have a very light hand when applying a brush-on sealer. I will load up my brush with my sealer and then gently swipe across the top of it with 1 or 2 strokes at a time. Otherwise, I risk smearing my image. After my top coat has dried, I decided to add a transfer to the back side of these blocks. I'm going to be using the Iron Orchid Designs Lover of Flowers. I've selected 2 of the flowers that I want to go on the back of these blocks, so I'm going to cut them out and apply them to the blocks. I'll peel the white backer away from the transfer, lay the transfer on the block, and use my transfer tool to rub over the transfer and transfer it onto the block. The transfer needs to be sealed, and you can use a brush-on poly or top coat, a spray sealer, or a wax. And I'm going to be using the DIY clear wax. I'm going to follow that up with the Chalk-Tique wax in dark brown. And here are our completed shelf sitters. These little bunny paint inlays are adorable, and I love the flower transfers on the back side of the blocks. Tell me in the comments below, have you used a paint inlay? And what do you think of these little bunny shelf sitters? For our third and final project, we're going to be using a CnC DIY Factory handmade custom design noodle board stovetop cover or oversized tray. This can be found only through the premium workshop packages or as a custom order on our website. I'm going to start by using the DIY cottage colors in vintage linen, and I'm going to paint the entire board front and back along with the handles with a large chip brush using the heavy dry brush method. Once the paint has completely dried, I'm going to pull out the Decoupage decor tissue paper by Redesigned by Prima, entitled Dreamy Bunnies. You can get this paper from Tara at the Reclaimed Ranch, and I'll have her website tagged in the description below. These decoupage decor tissue papers are large. They're 19.5 by 30 inches, and there are 3 different bunnies in this set. The decoupage paper fits almost perfectly inside of this noodle board, but I want to trim around the edges to make it frayed just a little bit. So I'm going to use my water pen, and I'm going to mark a line along the edges where I want to tear off the excess paper. Once I have the decoupage paper the size that I want, I'm going to take a pencil and I'm going to draw around the outside edge of the decoupage paper. This is so that when I apply my stain, I will know where the stain needs to stop. I don't want the stain to go into the center where the decoupage paper will be applied. The stain I'll be using is the Minwax Water-based Stain in Legacy Brown, and I'll be applying it with a staining sponge. I'll work in small sections using my mister and my shop towels to wipe back the excess. I will apply the stain to the outside edges, the handles, and the back side of the noodle board. Once the stain is completely dry, I'll take my 220 sanding sponge and I'll do a light sanding across the entire surface of the noodle board. The decoupage paper is made of a fibrous material that is similar to a dryer sheet, and it comes out of the package with folds and wrinkles. So I'm going to take my craft iron and just iron out all of the wrinkles. I'll be using my DIY liquid patina to decoupage this tissue paper down. Since this decoupage paper is fibrous, it will require a heavier amount of DIY liquid patina to adhere it to the board. Now that the decoupage paper is adhered to the board and completely dry, I need to seal the entire noodle board. I'll be using the Wise Owl varnish in matte finish. I want to give this decoupage paper some protection, so I'm going to be using the Beast Bond epoxy resin. This is an ultra gloss, and it's a self-leveling UV and impact resistant resin for tabletops and countertops, and this is a mix with a 1:1 ratio. I will be mixing up 8 ounces of part A and 8 ounces of part B for a total of 16 ounces. I measure out each component in their own separate cups and then pour them together into a silicone bowl. I'll mix this for at least 3 minutes, mixing very slowly so as not to incorporate bubbles into the epoxy. You'll want to be sure that your measurements are very accurate. If you deviate at all with either A or B, your epoxy might not cure correctly. This is a long cure epoxy. It takes at least 24 hours for it to dry and cure to the touch, and then at least 72 hours to cure completely. You'll want to make sure that there is no touching of this epoxy once you lay this down, or your fingerprints will be in it forever. Please be sure to follow the manufacturer's suggestions on the proper use of this chemical product. Once I have component A and component B thoroughly mixed, I will pour this into my noodle board, making sure to get all of the epoxy out of the silicone bowl. Once I have that poured out, I'm going to take my hand, my gloved hand, make sure you wear gloves, and I'm going to spread that epoxy across the top of the noodle board, making sure that I have every bit of it covered. One thing I want to mention is you want to make sure your surface is completely level. I have blocks underneath of the noodle board, and I took a level and I placed it all around the board to make sure that it is completely level. This is a self-leveling epoxy, but it will move to the lowest point on your board. So you want to make sure you have it 100% level. I will look at it from all different angles and make sure that there are no skips or missed spots of the epoxy across the surface. Once I'm certain that I have it smoothed out completely, I'll use my heat gun and I will run it across the top, blow it across the top of the epoxy to pop any bubbles. Make sure you do not leave it in one spot for very long because you can scorch the epoxy. You will also want to make sure that you have this in an area where no pets and no little debris can fall into the epoxy. I'll babysit this for about an hour to make sure that it sets up okay and it doesn't shift, but any debris or fuzzies will stick in that epoxy. To assist with popping the bubbles, I will also use my isopropyl alcohol at 99% and spritz it across the top. As it falls and touches the epoxy, it will pop any bubbles at the surface. And this is what it looks like after I have just poured the epoxy and taken out all of the air bubbles. Now I'll watch this for like an hour and we'll see how it turns out. And here is our Peter Cottontail noodle board. I am just so tickled pink with how this turned out. I absolutely love it. It's going to be very hard to let it go. Let me know in the comments what you think of this project. And here's the final reveal of all of our bunny projects today. Thank you so much for watching. I would love to know what you think of all of these projects in the comments. If I have inspired you today, I would love it if you would hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos that will be coming out. Thank you so much. Let's all practice random acts of crafting and make something great together. Bye for now. The products in our video can be found in the description box below. You can also find some of these items on our website at www.cncdiyfactory.com.